I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen! Seriously, F1, you call what happened to Isack Hadjar a small off? Do me a favour. And it's not only me making a fuss out of this, just look at the comments from the Day 2 video highlights. They're saying the same thing. On Monday I said Max Verstappen's teammate would face some of the heaviest pressure in Formula 1. Not from inside Red Bull, they're absolutely fine with him, but from outside, every incident around him would risk becoming a referendum, and if it's negative, well, cue the second seat curse. The external intensity could shape the atmosphere around a driver, and atmosphere affects performance. And then, look what happened. The moment a red flag was flown, and the moment I got notifications on my phone said, "Red flag related to Hajar," I thought, oh no. Oh no. And when you combine that with the awkward way that Formula 1 has tried to circumvent the team's draconian security protocols around the Circuit de Catalunya, meaning that we're getting very limited information, and the unofficial stuff is actually the more insightful and enlightening content that we're seeing, it's just an absolute firestorm. The pictures from the trees show that he went into the wall quite badly. Then we hear the news from Lauren Meckies and Red Bull that they're not entirely sure whether or not they'll even be able to get out for their third and final allocated day. And then we got the official status from the very, very short F1 Day 2 highlights video, where most of the time it was talking about things nothing to do with the test to try and fill up time, all 4 minutes 32 seconds of it. And when Isack Hadjar was mentioned, it was a small off that it seemed absolutely fine, almost like he just went a little bit wide into a corner, nothing major. And then Lauren Meckie said that, yeah, it is actually something kind of major, and there was a little bit of a disconnect, which would make some people feel a little bit suspicious. Then came this gem from Twitter user Roberto F1, the same mad lad who captured Audi's first action shots, of Hajar in the wall. Suddenly, the nature of that small off became much clearer. And with only one car fresh from the factory with limited spares, it kind of justifies Williams' decision in not showing up to the test in a way. What with their ongoing FIA crash test saga? Because if we're getting teams who were ready to go for this shakedown and were actually willing to put the car out in that kind of condition and then suffer the consequences of it and are not certain whether or not they have the enough parts or spares or wherewithal to actually get the car back out again, just imagine what Williams would have had to go through with even less parts to hand. They would have been sweating buckets and bricking other materials that I really cannot mention here at this time of day and in this economy. So quite frankly, I think Val's squad spared themselves some heartbreak. And at best, that repair job that we saw from Roberto would take several hours or a couple of free practice sessions. It would have been a very hasty and terrible Friday. Now though, this is practically game ending if it's not dealt with quickly, because we don't know the full allocation of parts that Red Bull has right now with only one car. You could be done for the week, or you just have to move your third allocated day towards maybe at best Friday if you can get parts from Milton Keynes in time. You know, pull that kind of Hail Mary, since teams don't necessarily have to allocate time consecutively. And hopefully it might provide Max Verstappen a little bit more time in the car. He only got about 27 laps around the circuit, and that's not exactly enough, especially when you consider that Esteban Ocon did more than 6 times that in one day. But then again, this does lend back to the belief that Max had not that long ago, that this shakedown test would often have situations where you'd be spending more time in the garage than on the track, going through the data and trying to troubleshoot. So this sort of checks out with what Verstappen prophesized. So okay, Law, how bad is this really? Well, one thing it definitely tells you is to just not trust anything that Formula 1 tells you about this shakedown test. And to whoever edited that highlights video, you really should have left out that last part that Mr. Meckie said, because it really threw a lot of foams in your direction. Now we've got multiple publications debating about whether or not Red Bull is prepared for the task in building the car, which otherwise would have actually been quite standard. So here is what Meckie's had to say for your consideration, and it only makes this entire situation all the stranger, and that particular crash the hallmark as to why this entire fiasco is just that. They should have just let the teams have this one. We should have just not seen any of this. But anyway. It was very tricky conditions this afternoon, so very unfortunate that it finished that way. But it's part of the game. These difficulties came out of a very, very positive day yesterday in terms of the number of laps Isack could complete in the car, and in terms of his learning and development and feedback to the engineers. We will try our best to repair the car and see what's coming next. The priority right now, as we speak tonight, is to assess the damage on the car. is to see what days it gives us to in terms of opportunities to run in the next days. We only have 1 day left, so we have to make sure we play that card carefully, and it's an analysis that will take still a few hours. Now, I must also mention that Meckies also said that even if they did get a third day out of this, that it still wouldn't have been enough time to go through every single thing on their checklist, and then it can leave the Bahrain pre-season test open to getting down to the final details, as well as maybe chasing a little bit of performance. The more fun stuff rather than the boring conventional TPC stuff. But the nature of Meckies' wordings is plain to see that this crash was not ideal, made especially so given the rainy conditions and the very impressive first day where the same driver topped the timesheets and where he and Liam Lawson in the V-carb gave Ford many reasons to be quite chirpy. Plenty of running with no incidents related to the power unit that would curtail running, whilst their arch-nemesis Cadillac had issues which did curtail running for them. A nice shot across the bows from Ford over there. But going from that first day to the second day where it ended with a crash, that was then at the middle of a whirlwind of speculation from all circles, that was a very major crash down to earth, wasn't it? And the nature of this private yet not private test is just becoming clear, and it's just becoming an utter embarrassment. Poor Isack right here. I believe he did nothing wrong. I believe that Red Bull's trying its best to make good and protect him. But Formula One itself is not doing one of the success stories of 2025 any favours at all. You see what I mean here about how the pressure is not from internal matters, but external ones? But the way this whole thing has been telegraphed to us, the fans, is that it's a test which F1 granted the team so as to provide more opportunities to iron out the new power unit. But now, according to Motorsport Week, the way that picture's been painted is the complete opposite. It's become clearer that it was the teams which led the way here, with F1 the ones bargaining for a compromise perhaps, which may explain why private security has been so heavy-handed, because you can't even get the conventional media junkets in there. Because once you close the doors, you just leave whatever tidbits you can get to force itself out the gaps around said door, and us leaning on the guys from Soy Motor up there in the trees all day to provide us more and more information from that one particular vantage point around turn 14. But this Formula One test has now evolved into some sort of test regarding trust, and quite frankly, Formula One failed to capture our trust. They tried to just completely hide it and say, oh, nothing to see here, it was a small off, absolutely fine. Oh, this test is going absolutely splendiferously. We're really not having any problems with this regulation cycle at all. But it's left just enough crumbs there to provide us a little bit of intrigue and go hunting, sniffing for things, for live timing data to somehow find its way into YouTube's hands and fingers, and so the moment something actually happens, like Hajar losing it in the wet at Barcelona's turn 14 and going backwards into the barriers, the official version and the unofficial versions immediately split into two different universes, with the unofficial one winning out. Then Meckies comes out and says what he says, with the more concerning part left in the final cut, and shared more fully in the press. And what he did share wasn't what you would say after a harmless little love tap into the barrier that Formula One would lead us to believe. So given all that, what do you think happens next? The wider world of Formula One fans goes on to believe that the sport itself is trying to hide things to try and shape reality to a manner which they see fit. And how little is officially visible, in fact there was barely anything, and what we got unofficially has led us to the speculation as to whether or not this was a car error or a driver error. And honestly, this could have easily been down to some sort of lingering issue from when Max Verstappen was in the car and then Isack Hadjar had to take up all of the grunt work for the rest of the day, and in wet conditions. But either we will not get that, or whatever conclusion Red Bull finds, they will be very much keeping it to themselves. And if we don't get any information, the easiest solution for us all to conclude is that, yeah, it's driver error. And that is a nightmare scenario for Isack Hadjar, because he's become an unintentional symbol of a media blackout that fans already resented, a story bigger than him that had been brewing long before his crash. And I must reiterate, I would have been fine with hearing and seeing nothing from this test. Maybe some extreme close-ups on socials or seeing the drivers' faces, but what we've got, it's very much brought on the idea from many that F1 may as well have gone the whole hog, but as has been told, their hands were seemingly tied and they had to make do with what they got, where the teams this time held the cards and F1 had to go begging to them. A very unusual situation for Liberty Media to be enduring. And since the story has gotten so out of hand, the moment that Isack crashed into the barriers, he became more than just a driver who went into the barriers. He became a plot point in this particular story. and of course the plot that is the second seat curse. Great. Can you tell I'm being sarcastic there, by the way? I don't want this to happen. But to be fair to the teams, this is the most fragile moment of the year. I mean, Williams have already proved that to us. They've got a new chassis, a new concept of car with bits that haven't been mass-produced yet, and the supply chain isn't up to speed either. Sure, Red Bull could wait a couple of days to get back out again, but their team principal isn't entirely certain that's even possible as of now, a few weeks before when we usually start to have active running of F1 machinery. Admittedly by their own doing. They're the ones who scheduled this test, so if they ran into any troubles, well, that's their own lookout. And to make matters worse for the teams and their PR departments is that fans have been given enough access to see stuff, but not enough access to see absolutely everything, and to understand the full context of any situation. And it really doesn't help that Liberty Media has been promoting this test in a manner not too dissimilar to what they would do for their own standard pre-season tests, and that is the perfect environment for conspiracies to occur, as well as public outrage, and every single tired narrative that we've got going at the moment to be reared up once again. Seriously, it's just going to make our spanners of speculation go into overdrive and become increasingly worn. And I must stress, because it has come to light that this has been at the team's own request, this test, and F1 have been left to clean up the mess. There is an element of accountability on both their front doors, because every single party involved wanted something different from this test. The privacy element? Oh, well, the teams wanted that. Content? Well, that's Formula One's bag, because this is the winter break. We're all starving for new things, and what's this? Formula One cars going around a track? Oh, that's absolutely perfect. And us fans? Well, we just want to have a little bit of data to look at to try and get some understanding as to what the pecking order is right now, even though the data we're going to get from the shakedown is even more skeptical than what we would get at regular testing. And we've kind of gotten used to the idea of getting information and data after years of unprecedented access since times gone by, but instead, we've got this weird mix where everyone loses trust in everyone else, and the press is all too happy to watch the fallout go down, them having been denied entry by the teams. I mean, we got the racer's Ed Straw standing atop a big hill, looking down at the track going, oh, I wish I could look down there. It wouldn't surprise me at all that many other outlets are at various places around the circuit going, this is what you get for not allowing us in to do our job. They're absolutely reveling in the fact that Formula One is caught in a little bit of a crisis of their own doing, and the team's now realizing, oh, yeah, this is a little bit of a mess. And then Isack's manager, oh, I feel sorry for them, and Isack himself. And with Formula One, seriously, you really should have just left this alone. But you just couldn't. You needed your content. And therefore, you being able to at least provide some content has been your own poison. A controlled drip of footage has allowed us to think, oh, well, okay, this is a bit like a normal test then. You may not be showing as much, but it's something. Then, hey, what's up with the security? Did you do this? Why are you doing this? Why are you being so restrictive, Formula One? Oh, it was the teams. Oh, was this meant to be private then? Formula One, what the hell, man? This was supposed to be private. I don't know what to think anymore. Ah! It causes outrage no matter what you do. And all of this going into the first chapter of what was supposed to be a monumental and revolutionary regulation cycle. Yeah, well done, Formula One. But we must bring this conversation back to Hajar, because this is a very serious situation, and it might not necessarily have been something of his own doing, because once it becomes clear that we're all just waiting for that driver to fail, conversations around him become much more loaded when they really needn't be. In fact, they shouldn't be. Yeah, he was the standout of 2025, but that to some is ancient history. We don't care about that anymore, many people think. 2026 is where it's at, right next to Max Verstappen. And even though the new guard at Red Bull insists that he has nothing to fear, that he's been given full support, 360 degrees in fact according to Laurent, the rest of the world may need time to adjust to that way of thinking, instead of defaulting to the norm, by providing negative energy to that second seat that can seep back into the paddock atmosphere regardless of what the team believe. And on top of the fact that Red Bull did really well on their first day with Ford branding on their power unit, with Isack himself providing big mileage and a really good time, he actually sounded relieved about what was going on, how smooth things were going. He did 108 laps, and then at the end of day 2, the emotional whiplash here is understandably brutal. And him doing the majority of all of the testing, whilst Max so far hasn't really done that much of it. He's come in, given his 2 penners, then Isack comes in for the afternoon in the wet, and then he goes and bins it. Either through a mistake of his own doing, or something going wrong with the car, which Max might have through its paces and therefore run it a little bit too ragged? I mean, Red Bull could have just called it a day in the afternoon and then just waited for their final day to get back to some more representative dry running. But then at the same time, given that only Ferrari went out in those conditions, the temptation to get some good wet weather data must have been a bit too attractive for mechies to ignore. And if they can get some real-world data into the Red Bull simulator, then all the better. Especially if we get a repeat in Australia where it was a washout. So quite frankly, I lean toward the idea that the car betrayed the driver rather than the driver just trying a little bit too hard, being the hero and the like. And if you look at Roberto's picture, the car went backwards into the wall, usually meaning that rear grip completely deserted them. And with a brand new chassis and power unit and no wet running before then, and let's also not forget that these new cars are full of new driver controllable modes and energy management behaviours to maintain and switch through on the fly, which Hajar himself talked about the day before, that there are a lot of new modes to tweak even after a smooth first day. So you could end up with a crash that was maybe the first public hint that the new cars require a lot more multitasking than before. Now, I'm not saying the drivers are way in over their head, because all of the other drivers on the first day said that yes, these cars are different, it's a little bit of a handful, but it's not something that is completely beyond them. But at the same time, this was the first time he did all of this in the rain, this multitasking, so it might have been only natural that the car might have just completely went into blue screen mode and oh no, wait, sorry, that's a more Mercedes joke these days, isn't it? And if you want to put a silver lining on this cloud, which is apt considering it was raining a lot, then hey, if Isack were to have his first ever crash in a Red Bull, it's best to do this now than in the pre-season test, which it would have been a lot more of a stressful situation that close toward the season's start. But then at the same time, all the secrecy and the security around this event has just made the situation even worse, at least in the short term, so oh dear, oh dear. And the fact that Formula One chose not to showcase it at all, or at least be a little bit more open about it, is only going to drive more and more people to eschew the official channels and look toward the unofficial one. So all of those people around the track, they're going to be making bank over the next few days. And all of this has just led to the idea that Formula One is just trying to hide something. And yes, of course, it's 2026. The teams want to hide their cars as much as possible. Well, Formula One has done a great job in hiding the Formula One cars, am I right? All of the articles just going over the cars, the designs, the tweaks, the little secrets, the innovations. We've already got it, so I'm sorry, teams. You've been outed. Even though you tried not to, your own sport betrayed you. And I also keep seeing comparisons to 2014, because that was a real baptism of fire with the new turbo hybrid engines, or at least they were new at the time. And the teams went through an absolute drubbing when it came to unreliability and public scrutiny, because remember, that was the year where Formula One cars sounded like vacuum cleaners. I mean, really like vacuum cleaners. At least now, with the absence of the MGUH, the cars that I've heard so far do sound that little bit louder and that little bit more raw. And the worst that I've heard is that it's just the same, which wasn't in itself that bad. But as Motorsport Week also says, perhaps the teams remembered all of that drama and decided not to go through it again. So, on the side of caution, they chose to tighten up access to work and reliability. But F1 couldn't leave it alone, and so far, it actually has proven to be a bit of a storm in the teacup, because the cars have so far mostly held together, with Ferrari-powered teams racking up plenty of mileage and giving the Tifosi that little bit of hope, because Leclerc, he doesn't look like he's about to top himself yet. But let's not get carried away. This is not peak performance that we're seeing right now, because the lap times that we are getting, even though they are not representative at all, are far off even the most conservative predictions as to what lap times will actually be when the cars are going full bore. About 2 to 3 seconds off of what they were last year, we're seeing 7-8 seconds off at best. And even though a more reliable representation of a car's solidity is the amount of laps they can get down, even then, that doesn't necessarily mean that we know for sure whether or not that car is good to drive or not, because you could do plenty of laps, but you could absolutely hate them. So, okay, where does this all leave Isack at the end of the day? Well, he's stuck between 3 narratives. There is, of course, the second seat saga, there is the new engine itself, and of course the new regulations. He's at the centre of it all. It's a really huge cross for a driver to bear at this time of the season, in fact before the season's even begun. And it really lends to the belief that I've had in recent times that the second seat curse of Red Bull has actually moved away from the team itself, and instead it's gone and infected the algorithm. An algorithm which often pushes for the most simple explanation. If a Red Bull driver in the second seat is having a bad day, oh, that's a second seat curse for you. When is he going to get his P45 or his pink slip then? Huh? And thusly, that way of thinking has turned what should have been a conventional and not surprising crash. As Meki said, this is just what is part of the game. It turns what Isack had into a public trial without real context as to the full understanding of what exactly happened. And it then just adds more notion to the belief that rookies get far less time than they used to in trying to hit the ground running. Remember the old days where Toro Rosso's Franz Tost said a rookie needs 3 seasons to really find their feet and whether or not they're really cut out for Formula 1? These days, we're lucky that a rookie gets a few races. And what F1 has done right here has just made the situation even worse for them and the drivers, especially the younger ones, because it's going to push people away from their own channel, to go looking for the truth. And once they go looking, more instances will be stapled with different narratives than the teams and Formula 1 would like. But credit where credit is due to Mekies, because he's already done the sensible thing and to publicly back his driver many times and keep the focus on process and repair, to not resort to using the driver as the scapegoat. Maybe what little data they have points to a car problem, but I reckon the wider fandom would rather just want to see the curse sustain itself. It's a familiar story. A Red Bull without issues in the second seat feels weird, alien almost. And hey, just so we're clear, I really want to see the second seat curse put to bed. I thought that was the case with Yuki Tsunoda. He gave it a really gosh darn good effort to try and purge that particular chestnut of Formula 1, but not quite. He's done a lot of work, he and Mekies, which is why he's still in a reserve seat, but it's not quite done yet. Hopefully Isack could be the one to see the second seat curse be put to bed, finally, for all of our sakes. And I just want the media to start thinking that way too, that hey, maybe Red Bull might decide to actually keep a rookie who may not be so hot for a second season to, let's be wild here, give them time to acclimate. But the fact of the matter is that the Barcelona Blackout has ultimately shown the teams and the sport that when you restrict information, you outsource the narrative to those with less tendency to sugarcoat, in an environment where Formula 1 is more popular than ever. And if those outside sources get the money shot, they're going to post it. And Audi saw all of this in reverse when they went out earlier this month. They got a ton of engagement, Audi saw that, then came up with their own images just a few hours later, which really screamed optimism, them being the first team at all to get their 2026 car out there, or at least a concept, and therefore they consumed all of the hype, the belief, the positive vibes that the Formula 1 fans were getting at us screaming, finally, a 2026 car on the track that we can actually look at. Well done, Audi. Oh, they ate good for many days until we saw that their concept livery was the exact same, which I must admit, it was a little disappointing, but the colours are still really cool. And them getting the jump over the existing teams to boot. But the events of yesterday kind of proved the reverse, where Formula 1 fumbled the bag. The narrative that we have as fans is the narrative being shown by people outside of Formula 1's official channels. That's the reality fans have come to accept and want. And as a result, everyone involved, the drivers, the teams, the sport itself, are part of a narrative that they themselves have very little control over, all from the decision in trying to have as much control as possible. So this has just become an absolutely ridiculous farce. A story far messier than the back end of the RB22 right now. But one thing that is definitely not a mess is this video right here. I really enjoy making that video and I think you'll enjoy watching it. So I'll see you over there. I'm just going to warm up the ladder a little bit.